But there was another guy I served with whose grandmother did okay, and she ended up as queen. So, you really do meet quite a range of people in the armed forces, and I think for me that's one of the things I love about it. If you want to know about the UK, if you want to know about our country, one way in which you're going to meet people from literally every walk of life, not just from your bubble, not just from your work area, join the army, regular or reserve. You will meet people from backgrounds and parts of the kingdom that you never knew existed.
My name is Jonny Ball, and I'm the founder of CampaignForce, a not-for-profit that inspires, trains and coaches the armed forces community to stand up and serve again. I've served on the front line of military operations and in civilian life, the front line of UK politics. This Veterans in Politics podcast is a set of interviews brought to you by CampaignForce and sets out to explore how the military community can help make our politics a better place. I lean into my little black book of contacts and sit down with individuals from across the world of politics, sharing secrets, giving tips and advice, and inspiring the next generation. We are CampaignForce. This is the Veterans in Politics podcast. Let's introduce you to our guest.
This week, we meet Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat MP. Like our host, Tom has served in the Intelligence Corps and is also a linguist. Jonny and Tom talk about being friends with the opposition, dodgy haircuts, and relations with China. They also have a retro moment in the context of the times that we live in by discussing the big society. It's time for you to meet our guest.
Tom, it's an absolute delight to see someone, in fact, like yourself, because I make a habit of making sure that every series of this podcast of Veterans in Politics, we have someone from my own cap badge, the Intelligence Corps. So how are you?
We're the only ones who can read, so, that's why we're here.
And hopefully speak as well. Not that we're particularly known for it in our corps, but no, absolutely delighted to sit down with you because I know you're an extremely busy person, and I know that in these times that we live in, not only as a constituency MP but also as chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, you are an extremely busy person. But how are you?
Yeah, I'm really well. I mean, lockdown has really been made for the InCorps, hasn't it? Because we're all dark rooms. Loads of screen time. We're the chairborne artillery, aren't we? We just sort of sit back and point at big maps. Isn't that right? Isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're exactly. I couldn't have phrased it any better myself. But yeah, we're fit for this and made for this. But why on earth, as someone of your background, get involved in politics in the first place?
Well, like many other people in the military. You get into the military because you want to serve. You've got a passion for your country. You've got a passion for various ideas you want to see, and you've also got a bit of a sense of adventure, I hope. And so sort of taking that from the military to politics isn't actually a huge leap, as you'll have heard from many of your other guests. The reality is that most of us just are trying to do our bit. Whichever side of the house we're on, whichever political party we're from, we're just trying to do our bit. And so I think the link between the military and political service is actually quite strong.
Yeah, and you mentioned a few of the other guests that have been on this podcast. The likes of Johnny Mercer, Dan Jarvis, and many others. But in terms of your own service, I believe that you've actually served alongside some of these characters, and Doug Beattie, another one that springs to mind. Is that right?
Yeah. So Doug and I served together in Lashkargah in 2000 and God, I can't even remember, 6, 7, something like that. And we got blown up together. Doug had an office in the basement. It's the only sensible place to keep him, really. And he was only allowed out on good behaviour. Which never happened, and he was absolutely brilliant. And I had an office upstairs when I was advising the governor, and we had a couple of run-ins with suicide bomber and things like that. I mean, it was difficult days. And then Dan Jarvis and I did a few ops together way down the fishhook, actually, in Helmand and on patrols through the desert. I mean, I have to say it's the best bit of soldiering is going on patrol, and going on patrol with somebody who then becomes a mate like Dan was just fabulous. He's his policies are complete rubbish, but he's a brilliant commander, and he's a man of very high integrity.
And there is a photo that does the rounds of you and Dan out there together with some pretty questionable haircuts, if I'm quite honest.
Hey mate, this is style. This is not just lockdown. This is my comeback Richelieu. All is forgiven. Where's D'Artagnan?
I think it's probably a very unique picture to see of you and Dan together in theatre on operations, and now they can see you both together, albeit on opposite sides of the House of Commons. And it's something I witnessed myself during the Overseas Operations Bill, that you both were debating against each other. And it was really interesting to see two veterans in Parliament, in politics, debating, friends. But it was noted actually by a Labour MP during that disagreement, that debate, how you debated and the nature of that debate. I think it was Stephen Doughty who actually singled you both out in the nature of that debate. I mean, is that standard? Do you always get on, do you think, in Parliament that way?
Well, he and I do. I mean, we always have done. Look, as I say, I mean, I don't have to agree with him to have huge respect for him. I mean, he is, I'll say it again, he is a man of the highest integrity and somebody who I'm very, very honored to be able to call a friend. I mean, he and I have been through a lot together, and you don't need me to tell you that it's in adversity you get to know people. And my God, he's been through it, and he's consistently come up, demonstrating the qualities that you'd expect of a very fine individual, and I think he is. So I'm really proud of Dan. I think he's a wonderful man. That doesn't mean I agree with him. I think he's wrong on the Overseas Operations Bill. I think he's wrong on quite a lot of things too. But he's not wrong for the wrong reasons. He's just got a different perspective than me. And the whole point about Parliament is that we debate and we discuss and we try and come up with the best answers. I mean, and if we can, persuade each other, and if we can't, vote on it.
Yeah, just to see you in Parliament performing in that way and having that mutual respect was so powerful for me. It really, as someone that evangelizes on the values and standards of the armed forces community in every walk of life, not just politics, but business, society, our communities, I was really excited to see there you were, in the way that you behaved as politicians. I thought, well, if we can bottle this up and put this in our local communities and have people with these backgrounds, and it doesn't need not necessarily be the armed forces, it could be the blue light services, but those people that are purpose and values driven, then surely our politics is going to be better for it. Do you not think?
Well, I think a sense of duty. Look, there are many ways in which people can serve a community. And I have to say, I've been really struck in this COVID crisis. There's some very clear, examples of genuine devotion and heroism that we've seen in the blue light services. That's completely obvious, and something that, frankly, I think, I'm certainly humbled by, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for. But there are other people who haven't always been recognized, who've also demonstrated that, nurseries and school teachers who kept going, but also supermarket staff, taxi drivers. In my community, which is pretty rural, if you don't have taxi services, there aren't any buses you're going to get. If you don't have taxi services, a lot of old people will be unable to get to essential medical services, medical appointments and things like that. And the courage of and the devotion of some of those drivers has been really impressive, and many of them have gone above and beyond. If you talk to those who are running supermarkets at the moment, you'll see, look, people aren't turning up because they just want the cash. They're turning up because they realize this is an important thing to do. And it really matters that people are fed. It really matters that we have access to services at this time. So I have to say, I get your point. And I do think it's more obvious, if you like, in the uniformed and blue light services. But that doesn't mean you don't see courage and integrity in many other walks of life too. You really do.
Yeah, no, I think so. Perhaps we've been a bit retro with the big society here. Did it come too soon? And, Cameron tried to shine a light on that. And now is people step into that light, perhaps? Is it time for a resurgence of that, the big society, do you think?
I have to say, I always thought he was right. I mean, I think one of the great strengths of the United Kingdom, that's why I'm a conservative and why Dan's wrong, is that the state doesn't need to do everything. It's that actually society and community does matter. And, whether that's church groups or scouts or, local charities or whatever, the free association of free people voluntarily acting in support of their neighbors and community is hugely powerful, and much more powerful than pressed men and women. And we see this. There's a reason we run a volunteer army in this country. It's because it's damn sight better than a conscript one. You've got people who really want to be there, who know why they're there, who are genuinely motivated and really want to do it. And the same is true. When you ask people to give time for a community project, you very often notice that you can do things better through volunteer services than you can through state ones. Now, of course, that's not universally true. I certainly don't want a volunteer surgeon, but there are many ways in which you can motivate people better through different ways of doing it.
Yeah, I certainly think I do agree with you in part that this moment that we've lived in has been about the community. And I think that's what you refer to things like community conservatism, so I understand. And we've spoken about the big society, but I do think there is a weight and people expect. Finally, we've seen again the visibility of our uniformed services and the veterans community in our communities. Do you think that that's been obvious in the past, or it's this moment has really risen all of those communities to the surface?
I think they certainly surfaced. I mean, I think that's true. And you've certainly seen many of the sort of volunteer organizations within our community sort of stepping up that one step forward. And that's made a big difference. But I think that, we've got to be careful. I mean, I'm hugely proud of having had the privilege to serve in the Int Corps, and like you, I'm very grateful for the friendships I've made. Some of them you listed already, and others you may know from your own service. But the reality is that I'm very lucky to have met many interesting and decent people in many walks of life, and our community is made stronger by all of them, not just by those in uniform.
Yeah, I think that's a skill. If I may indulge in the uniqueness of the armed forces, we do have an ability to get on with absolutely everyone from different cultures and backgrounds, and I think that's all power to us in order to bring those communities together.
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, one of the people I knew, got to know very well in Iraq, it was actually had been sold by his grandfather when he was a very small child, and even in the 70s, social services thought that was a bit wrong. And so he got taken into care. But he ends up being RSM of the Royal Marines unit and did incredibly well for himself, and has actually, in the last few years, set up a business and made an awful lot of money. I mean, he's really demonstrated his, he's paid back society and then some. I mean, he's an amazing guy, and I'm really, really proud to be friends with him. But there was another guy I served with whose grandmother did okay, and she ended up as queen. So, you really do meet... quite a range of people in the armed forces, and I think for me that's one of the things I love about it. If you want to know about the UK, if you want to know about our country, one way in which you're going to meet people from literally every walk of life, not just from your bubble, not just from your work area, join the army, regular or reserve. You will meet people from backgrounds and parts of the kingdom that you never knew existed.
Yeah, I think so. Just being on patrol in any snapshot in time in recent operations, you'll be on patrol with members of the Commonwealth and even members from Yorkshire as well, was my experience. So big shout out to the boys from One Yorks. Very happy times that I had. But do you think, I mean, like me as well, you're a linguist. Do you think that knowledge of languages and culture enables you just to understand people a little bit better?
So I think it does. I mean, it's not a secret. If you can talk to somebody, you can get on better with them normally. Not universally the case. There are some people it would be much better not to talk to. But the reality is that I think there there are many ways of getting on with people and getting to know people, but languages really do help. And I studied theology mostly because I was idle, but also because I thought it was interesting. And the reality is that I couldn't have studied a more useful course, because through theology, I then went on to study Arabic, and that was useful. But actually, through theology, you're constantly trying to understand how people think about structure, how people think about family, how people think about authority, how they think about society, and so on. And it's I think with languages and theology, I have to say I found it very, very useful. Certainly serving in the Middle East, of course, but actually just serving around the world, serving even at home. Because what you're trying to do in the armed forces, and people often miss this, is you're not going out there trying to kill people. What you're actually trying to do is you're trying to shape events so that you get the result you want. Now, often, not always, but often, preferably without doing any harm, without using, as the euphemism goes, kinetic activity. And, understanding how people think, what motivates them, what might change their moods, what might change their minds, is a fundamental part of soldiering. And as an intelligence officer in particular, that's exactly what you're there for.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, we're inclined to lean towards that form of conflict. Human terrain analysis is an obsession of our trade in certain elements of that, and understanding our adversaries and the people within which we operate as well is deeply important to us. Do you think, though, that kind of background, that kind of approach has equipped you well for your current role as a chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee? Because I know you've been pretty outspoken about some of the international threats, and indeed targeted yourself by agents within the international space. So do you think that background has equipped you well, and what's that experience been like as chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee?
So I think the fact that those of us have served in uniform have literally been on the front line of foreign policy, because that's what it is, right? I mean, this isn't just some sort of boys' own adventure we decide to go on. These are supposed to be, maybe they're not always, but they're supposed to be, deliberate actions in pursuit of the interests of British foreign policy. And so, having done some of them, you do have an understanding of quite what you're trying to achieve. And I think that does help. But I also think that, in many countries, having served in uniform gives a credibility, because it's not just the UK you're dealing with. Of course, you're dealing with many countries around the world, and excuse me, and for many that's just a cold, by the way. That's not COVID. I've had the test. No, I'm like the guy.
You have to make your excuses, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like the guy who got a splinter at the Somme and got sent home for a splinter. It's rubbish, isn't it? A lot of other countries, having military service adds credibility to your position, and so and I think it does. That helps a bit too.
Well, there are 50 of you in Parliament now, and as we established, 4 from our own corps, so we definitely punch above our weight in the Intelligence Corps within our Parliament. But in terms of the post-COVID-19 world that we're about to face internationally, I mean, has this been a moment for the rise of globalism? If we look at the way that the international community has cooperated over vaccines, or has this been seen people retreat into their own nation states? Because if we look at international travel and the restrictions, and also where we perceive threats coming from and what those threats might be, I mean, is that the end of globalism or just the start?
No, it's not the end of globalism, but it's but the nation state is back, and it would be wrong to ignore that. Look, what we've seen over the last, not just since COVID, but over the last 4 or 5 years, is the re-emergence of the nation state as the single building block of many people's identity. Now, the nation state is slightly, what you mean by the nation state may not be quite the same as what I mean by it, in the sense that there are forces towards subnational identities, whether that's Catalonia or Scotland, and that's a challenge for many of us who see national identity in a different way. But it's certainly true that the nation state is back. If you look at, for example, the PPE squabbles in March last year, where even European Union countries put up barriers to PPE trade within Europe. If you look at, for example, the way that the vaccine rollout has been in many ways a race run by capitals, or indeed if you look at the way that Twitter and Facebook have used their power to silence President Trump. I mean, whatever you think of President Trump, those are the decisions of a small group in California determining, the ability of an elected leader to communicate. Now, I'm not going to get involved in whether they were right or they were wrong. You may think either. It doesn't really matter, or rather, it doesn't matter for these purposes. But what that did is it woke up a lot of people in countries around the world, including some Indian members of parliament I was talking to recently, that they are seeing, political discourse determined by the culture of the West Coast of the United States. Now, that's quite something if you live in Delhi. And so I think there's a reemergence of national identity. I'm not quite sure I'd call it nationalism because that's got such a negative tone, but you know what I mean, of national identity and competition. So I think this is a challenging moment for all of us.
And indeed, the type of people that you'll have in front of you in your select committee will be different. In looking beyond the fact that they represent a corporate organization, but beyond that, in terms of their influence, reach, and power, as you've just described. It's just wow. To be a student of politics in this day and age is, I don't know if it's enviable or something that's completely frightening. I have to ask one. It's been a while since I read any form of international relations, that's for sure. But anyway, Tom, this has been absolutely fantastic to talk to you. I do appreciate how busy you are to be able to sit down. But before we close out, would there be any little bit of golden advice you'd think about someone listening, sat here thinking, crikey, that sounds, I mean, we've gone from the micro to the macro in this very short conversation, but someone that might be inspired by this conversation, indeed by your work, not just from our own core, because we definitely punch away in Parliament, but if you're, not just a veteran or a reservist, but anyone listening thinking, do you know what, that's a bit of me, I want to stand up and serve again. Any bit of advice would you say for them?
Look, I'd say, first of all, get involved in your community. Democracy only works if you take part. It's not an event that happens once every 4 or 5 years. It's how we communicate. It's how we deal with each other every day. It's how we resolve differences. And so, being involved in democracy is everything from, campaigning for speed limits on your road outside your house and getting together with friends and neighbors to do it, to, changing the direction of the country. And so there's an awful lot you can do, to shape the world in which we live. And you can do it at every level. I'm reminded as my bedtime reading, and I'm sure it's yours too, Jonny, is the US Army Field Manual. And you'll remember that very early on, in fact, in chapter 1, I think it's right at the beginning of chapter 1, it says, every day do one thing to improve your defensive position. And I think the same is true of democracy. Every day do one thing to strengthen your democracy. Now, whether that's not firing off or repeating disinformation that's come over from some random cyber troll in Petersburg, or whether that's, smiling and being friendly with your neighbors, whatever it is, joining a political party, any political party, being involved in shaping the national debate and making sure that it's conducted politely. We've all got something we can do, and it can fit into any working life, no matter how busy or how much time you've got.
Perfect. Well, I'm not going to top that. Tom, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and speak to you very soon.
Cheers, Jonny. Nice to speak to you.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.